Welcome to this episode of the Essential Church Podcast, an ongoing conversation about some of the most important issues facing the local church today. I'm your host, Andrew Arndt, and today I want to take you to a conversation that we had recently with Katelyn Beaty. She is a graduate of Oxford University, and she was the youngest and the first female managing editor of Christianity Today and the author of Celebrities for Jesus, How Personas, Platforms, and Profits are hurting the church. Katelyn, in this really widely renowned book, does a masterful job diagnosing how celebrity became a feature and not just a bug of the evangelical church movement, how destructive it is for us. And then we talk with her some about what we can do to fix it. It was a conversation between Pastor Brady and I with Katelyn. We loved where this conversation went, and we can't wait for you to hear more. So without further commentary from me, here's to the interview. Well, we're really happy today to be with Katelyn Beaty. She's a graduate of Oxford University, where she earned a degree in theology and later became the youngest and the first female managing editor at Christianity Today. She's written for The New Yorker, Washington Post, The Atlantic, and The New York Times, and she's the author of Celebrities for Jesus, How Personas, Platforms, and Profits are hurting the church. And I'll also just say that she's also the keynote speaker at our upcoming Essential Church Learning Community in February, where we're going to be talking about the key elements of healthy church. So Katelyn Beaty, we're really happy to have you today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
And you're coming to us from New York today. What part of New York City do you live? What's the general area that you live in?
Yes, I live in a neighborhood in Brooklyn called Fort Greene. I'm not fancy enough as a person to live here, but I've been in New York for 4 years, and work remotely for Brazos Press, and it's a mostly exciting and great place to live. And then, of course, it's sometimes when you see a rat on the subway, it's like, why did I choose here? But mostly, it's great.
So I have a very important question for you. What is your favorite pizza place in New York City? There's a big argument there.
Yeah. Well, I will say I lived in the Chicago area for a long time. I'm definitely a New York pizza person more than a Chicago pizza person. The Chicago pizza is just overwhelming. It's like a whole pie, that you're supposed to eat in one bite.
Brick in the stomach,
So I love that New York pizza you can fold. It's very portable. It's actually a Detroit-style pizza place here called Ace Pizza that has like really crispy, crusty edges. That is my favorite. So that's probably unorthodox. That's not the right answer for New York.
I think that could raise some eyebrows. I mean, your favorite New York pizza is a Detroit-style pizza.
Exactly.
I think you got to be careful when you say that around.
I know. I think it's that I'm a Midwesterner, and maybe I'm just, got to play for the home team. So.
Well, I want to say I read your book cover to cover, was very moved by it. I actually fired 3 of my personal stylists and got rid of the hot tub in my office as a result of your book. Very changed my life forever. No, that's a joke, of course. But I really was moved by it, and I told you off the air, but I want to say this publicly, that I appreciated the way you came with a surgical approach. You didn't come with attacking. There was not an anger or angst in your tone of writing, and I've written a lot as well, and the tone of what you said was beautiful. I could tell that you care deeply about the church, that the church has been a part of your life. I know that for just by following you on social media, how much you love the church, and how you've been careful not to throw the church under the bus. It seems to me that you want to be a part of the solution and the conversation that leads to healing. Can you kind of speak to that? When you started writing the book, how did you guard the tone? How did you guard your tone when you started writing it?
Yeah.
Tell us what motivated you to write it.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad, just to start off, I'm so glad that came through, Pastor Brady, that I was writing actually out of love for the church and wanting to diagnose what I see is a threat to the health and integrity of the church so that it can heal and more fully and better reflect the beauty of the gospel. Because like you, I'm sure, and like a lot of your listeners, I've seen these headlines in recent years. I used to work at Christianity Today, where sometimes I had to write the headlines about fallen celebrity pastors and how that really had this scandalous effect in that church community and beyond. And I'm sure, like all of you, I'm tired of seeing the headlines. I don't relish seeing those headlines. They're painful to see. And so what if we all kind of took a diagnosis of our own church cultures to say, are there things in our church that we're fostering, even if very unwittingly, maybe we're not even aware we're going in with good motives, but could we end up on a trajectory that leads to unhealth, that leads us away from the gospel that we're trying to share with our neighbors? So writing the book really to explain a phenomenon and to help readers see and understand these celebrity dynamics so that we can all be aware of guarding against them, in our own lives, in our own spirituality, in our own church cultures.
So, Katelyn, let me just pivot off of that and just ask you this question. I love what you're doing in diagnosing the problem here, and I love that you're not just kind of looking at the contemporary landscape and going, well, look at this thing that's happening, but you're taking us back to some of the roots of evangelicalism. And so one of the things that you say in chapter 1 is that you say celebrity, I love this, you said that celebrity is a feature and it's not a bug of the contemporary evangelical movement. Somehow this is definitional for who we are, and you give some historical insight into that. Can you talk to us about what you mean by that? How is it a feature of the movement? And then why is it that you think celebrity is so destructive for our witness?
Yeah, well, I will say this as someone who grew up in an evangelical context and is very grateful for evangelicalism as a movement, because without it, I likely wouldn't have come to faith in Christ. That's where I came to know Christ. Evangelicals as a whole are pragmatic people. They want to use whatever tools are available to reach as many people as possible with the gospel. And that means often a kind of early embrace of mass media, of the tools of the screen. When we're thinking about the evangelist kind of pre-screens, even using newspaper media and radio and television to share the gospel with as many people as possible. And in that milieu, celebrity has been seen as kind of a neutral tool that can be used. Like if we grow our pastor's platform, if we get him on these exciting media outlets, if he has a big and growing social media following, that all could potentially make sure that, one more person hears the gospel. So it's been seen as just a tool to kind of be picked up and put down. And part of what I'm arguing is that, it's a tool, and looking at American culture and that landscape, it's a very effective tool. We are obsessed with celebrity. There's a reason we call it celebrity worship. Part of what I want to say, though, in the book is that it's not a neutral tool.
Right.
The quest for celebrity, for platform, for bigger and better can really and has really shaped us from the inside out. Yep. One of the things I think it does is it often draws more attention to the celebrity than to the gospel or the person of Christ that we hope that people walk away remembering. Yep. It's almost like, the celebrity is the thing that really sticks, or the person that people become attached to. And then I think, too, when we're thinking about the life of the local church, the celebrity, I argue in the book, has a way of creating distance between the celebrity person and the crowds or the masses. That distance, that lack of proximity is part of how celebrity works. And I think as Christians, we want to say we were designed by God and called by God in Christ to live in proximity to each other. And that's not always fun. Having people really know me, both the good and the bad, is not always fun. But, when we're thinking about life in the local church, that is what we're called to. And that's actually what will bring out our flourishing and will speak to the needs of our neighbors who are lonely and isolated and want to be known and show up and know that they're seen and accepted. And I don't know if a church culture that centers on a celebrity figure always allows for that.
No, it's a good point. If people are talking more about the person preaching than Jesus after the service, then we have failed them. I want people walking out of our building talking about Jesus. And that's one of the reasons that we made a shift 8 or 9 years ago to end our services coming to the Lord's table. It was for this very reason. We said, Whether or not the sermon was great, whether or not the songs that we sang were the most popular ones, whether or not we hit the mark with all of our performances, I want people to walk out, and the last thing that is talked about in our service is the resurrection of Christ, the body, the death, the resurrection of Christ. And 8 or 9 years ago, we've been doing that, and we were one of the few probably evangelical megachurches that end services. We're not high church, but we're not low church. So we're somewhere in the middle.
Like middle church.
But it was a shift that we made for that very reason, Katelyn, is to make sure that the people were talking about Christ. The last thing that they're talking about is the person of Christ. And I loved your book. And can you give us the definition of celebrity? It was like living in proximity. I want to get it right. Give us it was a beautiful definition.
Yeah, well, it's tricky to define, and I do want to distinguish it, and I do distinguish it in the book from something like fame, because fame can be something that comes really as a byproduct of good work in the world, of a life well lived, of virtue. As Christians, we might think, okay, I became famous or I got this renown because of something that I or my church did. Well, now I have to figure out how to steward this well. I wasn't seeking it, but now that I have it, what do I do with it? Celebrity is something that is sought for and garnered for its own purposes as the good in and of itself, using the tools of mass media to project an image of importance, of significance, of attractiveness. And I think significantly for the church, celebrity is social power without proximity. So going back to that, the significance of proximity and I want to know my pastor. I want to know my church leaders. I want to know the people who are shaping my heart and mind sitting in church week in and week out. And celebrity has a way of creating distance so that you can't really get to know that figure or persona.
Say that again. Social power without proximity. Did I say that right?
It's the ability to shape and influence and even captivate. I think that there's something about celebrity much more so than fame that is focused on an attachment or even an adoration of the person. It's not so much the work they're doing or the way that they minister or the good words that they share. It's like them. That's the focus. But it's all from the distance of the screen or the stage. And in that distance, people, I don't wish celebrity on anybody. People who have it or find themselves with it will often talk very painfully about kind of the loneliness and isolation at the top. Like, so celebrity is not good for people, right? Because again, we're made to be in proximity with other image bearers, where our full selves can show up, where people accept us not because we're impressive or we're really great at growing something, but because God made us in a particular way and God is working in and through us and we're in community together. And so, I would, part of this is cautioning people who might think, gosh, if I could get celebrity status, then I would feel significant, loved, accepted, or then our church would really start growing. I would never, suggest that anybody try to seek it. If you end up with fame, okay, figure out how do I steward this well and faithfully, but don't seek it out for its own sake.
It can be sought as an end within itself. That's when it becomes destructive.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey guys, Andrew here, cutting in real quick just to remind you of our upcoming Essential Church Learning Community here in Colorado Springs, February 21st and 22nd. It's a couple days of conversation around the theme of healthy church. What does it mean to be a healthy church? We talk about some of the key indicators of healthy church. We're going to talk about developing a healthy staff and leadership culture. We're going to talk about some of the principles of self-leadership, self-management. And then we're also very pleased to welcome special guest Katelyn Beaty, author of Celebrities for Jesus, to talk about the problem of celebrity in the contemporary church and what we can do about it. It's going to be a great couple days together. Spots are limited, so head to our website and register today.
Katelyn, talk to young men and women who are obsessed with this right now. We have a lot of people on our podcast that are in their 20s. They're just beginning their pastoral journey. They are looking at, I have this theory that most of our young leaders are being discipled by the stage and not by sages. And that's been a problem. What they're seeing on the stage is being celebrated, so it becomes their goal to be that person. So what are some of the early indicators? Some of the, let's say you were some type of spiritual doctor able to diagnose celebrity in the heart of a young leader. What are some of the early indicators that we may have been given ourselves over to this need for celebrity?
Well, gosh, I am not a spiritual doctor, but I'm just gonna take a stab, which a doctor should not do. You don't just take a stab at something. Yeah, I'm thinking about, and I'm saying this to myself because I'm a millennial and I've grown up on the internet, most of my life, and so I get the allure of screens, and I get the pressure to grow one's platform, and I get how good it feels to share something. Maybe it's something you wrote or you preached and you upload it and you get all this feedback and you feel good about it. So a check for me is, how much time am I spending in front of a screen trying to grow and build this thing with people who I don't really know? Maybe I do have a good motive to reach people, but it's kind of like the nameless, faceless masses and getting something from them.
Right.
And compared with how much time am I spending with people in my church who kind of annoy me sometimes or are hard to minister to. Or, we have a really hard pastoral discipline conversation and it's hard work and it's not glamorous and it's not praised, but gosh, it's the work that God is calling us to. So just thinking about kind of where our time and energy and affections are oriented toward. Of course, I'm not the first or the last person to highlight this, but accountability. Who are the people in my life who are not impressed by me and also are not going anywhere, who can, if necessary, speak hard truths in love, who can ask hard questions about motives. A lot of this comes down to, what am I after? What am I seeking? And all of us have blind spots. We're all really good at deceiving ourselves about why we're doing what we're doing. So having people just, kind of gently ask the hard questions as an ongoing process of transformation. And then I also just think about legacy. And I think about, and I have to kind of put the blame in part on our American obsession with youth.
Yeah.
And thinking that the young person and the dynamic person is always the person who's the best to kind of lead a ministry. And I'm not saying anything against anybody who is young or dynamic by default. But the older that I get, I am just so taken by the kinds of leaders who have faithfully served a local congregation or place or neighborhood for decades, and they just keep showing up, and they're known, and they've taken the time to build relationships, and that's what they want their legacy to be, is I was in this place and this time to be a shepherd to people whom God has brought into my midst. And that the effect of that kind of ordinary faithfulness, I think this side of heaven, we can't really always see. It looks small or it looks boring or ineffective, but I'm more convinced that kind of long-term organic growth is more healthy, is healthier, and more sustainable and less soul-threatening than the kind of dramatic overnight, astronomical growth and success where someone wakes up with 1 million followers and they don't know what to do with it. And it has serious psychological and spiritual costs for them.
I'm interested, you live there in New York City, and I certainly don't want to pile on Hillsong. I'm a fan of many things that happened at Hillsong. I'm concerned about a lot of things, but there were certainly some good things that happened. What has been the effect in New York City? So in New York, a very secular, post-modern, very trendy city, certainly post-Christian, I would say in most cases in New York. What has been the effect among people there with the Hillsong scandal that happened there? Has it had an adverse effect on other churches in New York City, and how has that been handled?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I can't speak for all churches in New York because there are more than I could possibly know or count. I will say, I think a lot of churches in New York probably have former Hillsong members or attendees who have found refuge there. So I'm thinking about a woman who goes to my church who I met several years ago when Hillsong New York was still meeting. And she showed up at the church where I attend 6 months ago, and I thought, oh, there's a story here, right? Like, I want to sit down and hear what happened for her. I think there is real pain, just, a church that can reach young people coming to the city that I'm sure ministered to a lot of people. How do you recover and make sense of and process a church collapsing in large part over, a pastoral moral failure of someone whom you really trusted or looked up to? So I think there's pain. I think that there is probably a kind of a lesson for churches in New York when thinking about the kind of churches and church cultures we're going to create to attract people. Maybe what people are looking for, and I think this is so true, like now, even, more than 4 years ago. New York can be a very lonely place. It's a place where people come for their jobs, their transplants, but they find it hard to meet people. So I'm wondering if churches now realize, what we have to offer our neighbors is, again, maybe it's a smaller church, it's a church of 200, but at least I can have a conversation with my pastor after the service. I can get plugged into a small group. People are praying for me. I think that capacity to be known in a place that can feel so isolating and so anonymizing. I think I just made up that word.
It's a good word, though. It's very, very brilliant.
Yeah, I wonder if actually that's what people are looking for, more so than the arena rock stadium worship service kind of experience. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Katelyn, I want to ask you a question while we're still talking about churches specifically and even mega churches. I think one of the things that kind of a light bulb moment for me when I was reading your book was you talked about Billy Graham and whom you love and whom we all love, it's sort of a paragon of what it means to be an evangelical. But the thing that you see in the ministry of Billy Graham, which you point out, is that for the first time maybe not for the first time, but he was one of the very significant examples of all of a sudden the individual, like the charismatic individual, becomes more important for the mission than the institution. So he's leading these crusades, but they don't have a lot to do. He's not part of any institution. He's not a part of a church that's like carrying this. And one of the things that you point out is that the Billy Graham model in a lot of ways became like the American megachurch pastor model, is that we need this charismatic individual to carry this thing. This is how the mission of God goes forward and gets accomplished. And so there is this weird kind of thing where all of a sudden you have a pastor now he's larger than the institution that he leads. Can you talk for a couple minutes? Because I think a lot of the abuses that we've seen, especially in the last 10 to 15 years in evangelicalism, are directly related to this. So talk about why that's so destructive and harmful for the church, that you have an individual that's greater than the institution.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think about what can happen when a church or community perceives that, maybe it's a founding pastor or it's a pastor under whom the church has grown megafold. There starts to become kind of rationalization for that pastor or leader because the church recognizes, like, we don't really know who we are apart from this person, or we can't imagine ourselves thriving and growing without this person at the helm. And so we might be willing to overlook things that are concerning, maybe they're little now, but they could become big. They're small problems. They could become big problems. They're problems of maturity, of Christian maturity and groundedness. And there can just be we have these problems, but gosh, our church is growing. This is an exciting place to be. We don't want it to stop. We can't imagine ourselves if this person isn't in leadership. So let's just keep going, And then, of course, very sadly, something happens. The pastor is forced to resign or steps down. And then the church really struggles to regain their footing because they've spent so much of their DNA is oriented around this person. It's like an identity crisis afterwards. And I don't ever want churches to be in that place. Like, I think a healthy sign is to say, we love our pastor, we respect them and what they're doing. And also we know God raises up leaders, God brings leaders out of ministry. What we are doing together is not about that person.
That's right.
It's about what we are called to in the body of Christ. The Lord is, the ultimate guide for our church and community, and we trust him for the future. And so we trust that even if this beloved leader is gone for whatever reason, God has us and holds us. Even if it means, in some cases, maybe we have a smaller church. Maybe in 10 years, we don't see this astronomical growth, but what if the church and the community that remains is healthier? It's more spiritually vibrant. It's more receptive to the word. It's more giving. Like, what if, these signs of church growth are actually about spiritual health more so than numerical kind of the growth that you can kind of chart on a graph.
Yeah, we're certainly measuring the wrong things right now, and we're evaluating ourselves through the wrong lens. And I appreciate that your book kind of helped clear that up. And I can't recommend it more highly, especially for young leaders. I think leaders of all ages will benefit from it. If you love this conversation, I want to invite you to the Essential Church Learning Community in February. Katelyn's going to come out to Colorado. We coaxed her out here to get away from the busyness of New York to come out to the beauty of Colorado. She's going to be here with us on that Wednesday in February, and we look forward to having a more extended conversation on this topic, Katelyn. And thank you for taking the time to come out to Colorado and be with a group of pastors who really need to hear this message. I think the body of Christ around the world needs to embrace this message, evaluate this message. And I want to say again, thank you for writing it. Thank you for having the courage to put yourself out there. You could have wrote on a happy topic. You could have wrote on butterflies and rainbows, but instead you tackled a tough topic, and I admire that.
Thank you. I really look forward to being with your community in a short time. And believe me, like, the quintessential New Yorker thing is like, I have to get out of the city and into nature. So this will be a perfect reprieve. And I really look forward to the conversations we'll have at the conference.